Continuing on with the concepts of micro and macro models, we can see the same things occur on all scales. If a scientist claims something happens on the micro level, and conveniently those dynamics can't be observed on any other scale, then it's logical to question the validity of that theory. Man's direct observation of nature's processes is different than observing a man-made experiment attempting to duplicate nature. Man-made experiments can sometimes fool the observer into validating their own misconceptions or confirm a pre-existing bias. That evolves into an ad hoc theory, which becomes a tradition of ignorance in the scientific community. Here is an example, a segment from a recent video called 0N from MIT's Center for Bits and Atoms.
What if materials could defy gravity so that we could leave them in mid-air? Xeron is a physical and digital interaction element that floats and moves in space by computer-controlled magnetic levitation. Both the computer and people can move the Xeron in 3D space. Xeron's movements can be digitally manipulated. For example, the human gestures can be played back or rescaled in a physical form. A complex physics system, such as a three-body problem, can be simulated in front of you as a physical reality. It lets you directly put your hand into this 3D simulation space to manipulate its configuration in a tangible way.
So far, so good. Science win.
You can also change the orbit of a revolving planet, which will then change the velocity, confirming Kepler's law.
What? Confirming Kepler's so-called law? Science fail. We'll go over that in a second.
Using the Xeron as a sun, you can simulate lighting of your own world on a small scale.
Wait a minute. He just implied that the stationary purple sphere represents the sun, and showed how Kepler's law applies to a planet whose orbit is maintained on a flat plane around a stationary fulcrum, similar to the motion of a propeller blade spinning. But a propeller blade only traces a 2D circle. But in this very next segment, he says the moving 0N ball represents the sun. Which is it? The sun is stationary, or the sun is moving? How would the orbiting ball behave if that purple sphere were in motion? And how would any planet maintain a circular orbit around a sun which is moving in a particular direction on the X or Y axis? The experimental platform is using cylindrical electromagnetic coils. But as Walter Russell pointed out, there are no cylindrical waves in nature. All waves crescendo and then dampen. So the very shape of the man-made coils used in the experiment is against nature's processes. Where in nature do we find a cylindrical coil? All things grow in vortexes. A phi spiral is not a cylinder. It's a cone. So is the narrator of the video suggesting that the sun is electric and induction forces are acting on the planets? But that would contradict Kepler, Newton, Einstein, Hawking, and the rest of the so-called experts who insist that the sun is nuclear with a gravitational pulling force. You can't have both. The sun is either stationary and nuclear, like mainstream models suggest, or it's in motion and electric, as Wallace Thornhill and David Talbot's research show. And to top it all off, the sun is traveling on a z-axis, something not shown in the MIT experiment. As the 0n ball attempts to orbit the purple sphere, the purple sphere itself is supposed to be moving downwards on the z-axis. So how is a planet supposed to maintain an equatorial orbit around a sun on an x and y axis when the sun itself is traveling at a constant rate on a z-axis? Mainstream models of pulling forces from a nucleus cannot have another body maintaining a circular orbit around the equator on a flat plane. If the creators of the 0n experiment utilized a bit more logic, they would see there needs to be another dimension added to the 0n setup. If the purple sphere seen here were moving on a z-axis towards the table, the orbiting ball would follow in the wake of the purple sphere and trace a corkscrew or helical trajectory. For further clarification on the motion of the solar system, I encourage people to take a look at two videos I put together. One called Adding a Z-Axis to the Solar System, and the other called Twin Vortexes and VBM. Also, I suggest people to look into these four names. Now let's compare Kepler's law to how bodies in space actually move. Here's an experiment conducted by NASA in a zero-G environment. The Teflon needle is stationary, just like mainstream models show. So let's see how water drops behave near a charged object in space.
Watch this. So here I have a piece of paper, and I rub the knitting needle with a piece of paper. And this knit needle is a polyethylene knit needle. It's 8 millimeters in diameter. And now I'm going to take a syringe with a little Teflon cannula. I'm going to squirt drops of water out, and look what happens when those drops of water get close to that charged knitting needle.
I don't think that the astronaut fully understands the significance of his next statement.
So this is like a little satellite going around a cylindrical-shaped planet, except the physics here is a little bit different. It's not about gravitation. It's about charge forces, and of course, charges can exert a potential field, as we call it, so it can exert a force at a distance with no tangible connection.
According to the standard nuclear model, that water drop is supposed to be orbiting the equator of the cylinder on a 2D flat plane. But that's not what happens.
So you have a charged drop that was ejected from the Teflon-tipped syringe, and then you have the charged knitting needle, and they're going to be attracted if they're opposite charges, but because the drop has some velocity to it, it's orbiting around the knitting needle.
Once again, we encounter a man-made experiment with a stationary component. The needle itself has a velocity in reality and would be traveling on a z-axis, something not shown in NASA's experiment. So how would the water drops behave if the knitting needle was traveling in a particular direction? I'd like to make clear that the amount of training the astronauts go through to qualify and make it to space has nothing to do with the quality of their intuition and amount of innate logic those astronauts possess. Just because they made it to space doesn't mean they have more intuition than any of us down here. It means they are the best at regurgitating information, doing as they are told, and have spent countless hours of physical training. But their deductive reasoning and intuition is filtered through their training, just as scholars of the past had their information filtered through the church. So who is to say that outward training improves intuition and gut feeling? Sometimes, even the village idiot can point out a blatant flaw which experts might have overlooked. Research the difference between what is called a type 1 and type 2 error in psychiatry. Some people might consider this next clip gratuitous, but I think it's a funny analogy of mainstream science's thought process. Some experts are too blinded to see the blatant absurdity in mainstream explanations versus the actual data.
I'll click print, and we'll print it out. Now, while we're doing that, let me show you something really impressive. That picture, remember the picture of the horse I showed you earlier? Well, here it is, blown up. This is a big horse. Order now, you get the camera, you get the printer, 4x optical zoom, Schneider lens, photo printer, SD card. Look at that horse. The bushy tail, the big teeth, the hooves. Okay, my producer, Tara Cates, just told me this isn't a horse, it's a butterfly. Yeah, actually, it may in fact be a moth. But look at what the zoom did. I mean, you can see details in the antenna.
Yeah. This is how I view mainstream science's thought process on validating certain theories. One person will make an initial misconception, and then everybody else will peer review that misconception and see a horse. If you see anything other than a horse, you're going to be labeled crazy. Well, that kind of reminds me of a story by Hans Christian Andersen called The Emperor's New Clothes. If you can't see the robes of jewels and gold, then you must not be fit for that position of royalty, or you must not be intelligent, because only the smart people can see the robes of gold and jewels. Only the smart people can see that horse. So let's apply that same logic to a scenario in the scientific community. I'll click print and we'll print it out. Now while we're doing that, I'll show you something really impressive. That picture, remember the picture of the black hole I showed you earlier? Well, here it is, blown up. This is a big black hole. Give us more funding and you'll get the obsolete rockets, you'll get the satellites, 4 light-year optical zoom, Hubble telescope, stereo vision, spectroscopy analysis. Look at that black hole. The dark matter, the gravitational pull, that event horizon there. Okay, my colleagues just told me this isn't a black hole. I'm an idiot. Yeah, well, actually, I may in fact be a moron. But look at what the zoom did. I mean, you can see the details in the twin vortexes. And if you're not a member of that PhD club, they'll make erroneous claims that you must not be qualified to speak on such matters. And so-called peers will dismiss your perspectives, as if to say you aren't credible, until you agree to see their pale horse. Why is it that every time I search for a Hubble telescope picture of a black hole, all I find are cartoons and artist interpretations? There's a Native American motto about testing an idea 3 times before sharing it with others, as not to speak an untruth. Knowing the same things occur on all scales, we can use that logic to test a theory. If the dynamics of a theory can't be observed on the micro scale, our scale, or the macro scale, then something may be wrong with that theory. The more we question authority and question the experts, the less fiat currency we'll need to spend on wild goose chases,